Ladies and gentlemen, how are you? We're back. We're back for Monday, day 19. Day 19. I promise you, we are on day 19. Although, who can ever really be sure of days and weeks and numbers? But I believe we're on day 19. It is good to see you. It has been a very long day at court today. One of those. We went through a lot of witnesses today, got a lot of different information. Heard from a forensic pathologist, heard from a lady who works with the health department, and on her, she sort of worked with another lady we heard from another time. That DFFH woman, she sort of worked somewhat in conjunction with her. You would have heard about this lady. Her name's Sally Ann Atkinson. You would have heard from her in the other woman's testimony because they sort of talked very briefly to try and get in touch with Erin Patterson to start this investigation. And I'll tell you more about that later. But yeah, long day, a lot of witnesses today. This morning we had, who did we have this morning? We had Fox Henry. So Fox Henry was the first one up this morning, continuing his sort of evidence from several days last week. Today we mostly got his cross examination with Colin Mandy. So Colin Mandy was doing his cross exam on uh, Fox Henry, which he is a forensic, well, basically a forensic IT specialist from VicPol, and he was responsible for doing the magnet axiom testing, and there was a lot of questions about that. We'll get that. I jumped the gun a little bit. Okay, okay, I did. I don't think so. It says on me. It said on my side that we were good to go. It said on my side we're good to go. I can jump all the guns, all of them. Yeah. But yeah, we are doing all right. So we got a lot to get through tonight. There's a ton. I don't know how long this show is going to go, but we have a lot to get through. So, but first, I don't want to talk about Fox Henry because I think we've heard a lot of his stuff, but I will cover it later on. I want to go to the forensic pathologist. I don't want to do a ton on it, but I do want to give you an example of what it was like to hear uh, Brian Beer's evidence today, and his doctor Brian. I think we should all call him that. He might get mad if we don't. And where does he work? He currently works for the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine in Southbank in Melbourne here. And he says, yeah, that's where I work. And they say, how long have you been there? And he says, I've been there around 6 years. And they say, I want to ask you some questions about the autopsy regarding Heather Wilkinson. And he says, yes, that's fine. And they say, do you have a colleague called Dr. Michael Duffy? And he says, yes. And he says, Michael was a fellow at the Institute and effectively like a registrar, and I supervised his post-mortem. So they're going to talk about some post-mortems here. And they say here, did he, I think they're talking about Dr. Duffy here, did he perform an autopsy on the body of Heather Wilkinson, aged 66, on the 4th of August 2023 at 3 p.m.? And he says he did. And they say, were you supervising the forensic pathologist of Dr. Duffy? Or were you the supervising forensic pathologist? And he says, I was. And he says, have you read the autopsy report that he prepared? And they say, yes. So there's a lot of details here about how that sort of works. And I'll give you a little bit here. But basically, there's a request from police that's made for an immediate autopsy, and then the circumstances surrounding the death, and they sort of go from there. And they say here, what is the postmortem radiology CT scan? And he says, basically, it's a CT scan that you have as someone who is a living person. It is just done on a dead body. And they say, is that done before autopsy? And he says it is done before. And they say, is it fairly routine? And they say, he explained in court today, he's like, it's done on everyone. Anyone who passes away gets a CT scan in their autopsy or before their autopsy, but part of their death investigation, they get a CT scan. So he goes on to explain what that is. If you don't know what it is, we can talk about it. And he says it's basically like he called it computerized tomography. And he says basically your body gets cut up into multiple slices by the machine, not literally, just computerized. And he says that that is what you look at on the screen, and as such, it's done on a dead body. So it takes like you know uh, imaging of you in sections, and that's how they get like the scan of you. So it shows your body, and if I was a doctor, I might know more things about it, but I can only go by what I have. And they say here, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So they said when these people come in for an autopsy, one of the things they do is they weigh them, and they were saying here they also calculate your BMI. And they said, so the weight of Heather was 77 kilos and the height was 160 centimeters with a BMI of 30.1. And they said that there was some background information on this autopsy report about the age of Heather Wilkinson, and that she had reportedly consumed a mushroom dish and had been hospitalized with fairly serious conditions, and the lunch was presumed to have contained Amanita phalloides. So, and he says that's correct. So, Amanita phalloides is what we all know now after hearing it for 970 million times during the trial. It is the death cap mushroom. I hope by the end of the trial I never have to say that word ever again. I've said it probably a billion times myself. And they say, here, there's some background information. Yet she consumed a dish that they presume contained Amanita phalloides. And they say, what were the findings of the autopsy? And he says there was very extensive necrosis of the liver to the extent that virtually all of the liver cells were dead. And he says there was only a very small number around the portal tracts being viable. And they said, was anything else discovered on the autopsy? And he says, yes. So, in addition, the small and large bowel mucosa, that is the lining of the bowel, was necrotic. So, we'd heard about this before. This is called bowel ischemia. And this is one of the things that some of the people who died with this ended up having this condition. And this is basically where the tissue and organ, the bowel organ, it dies. No more blood flow, and it dies off, and it basically becomes a dead organ. And that's what they call it. They call it dead bowel or bowel ischemia. And that is what the autopsy is saying here, that the cells were dead. And then he's saying, he goes on to explain about the kidneys, and he says there are tubules within the kidneys, and they say the kidney acts to filter the blood, and it does that through a subunit called the nephron. And the beginning part of that is a glomerulus. I hope I'm pronouncing half these right. And he says, which is like a lot of small blood vessels that are compacted. And he says the blood gets filtered through that, and then it passes through what we call renal tubules until it's finally, he says, out the other end comes urine, and that goes into the uterus. And he says, so tubules are a very important part of this process, and they're responsible for a range of processes, which is basically removing waste and maintaining electrolyte and other balances within the body, also allowing for fluid maintenance. So he says, in other words, if it produces urine, and he says, So if you drink a lot, you produce a lot of urine. If you don't produce as much urine. And he says, now, as part of the issue with the toxin, that may enter these renal tubular cells and cause them to die. And he says, in effect, that can be very difficult to tell at autopsy because part of the process that you normally see at autopsy is autolysis, autolysis, whatever that is. And they say, here we go, which is effectively cell death. There you go. Autolysis is cell death. And they say that can be very, so he says it can be hard to distinguish in postmortem compared to like antemortem or premortem. And he says it's hard to figure out. And he says, so I just mentioned that because it's very difficult for us to actually, find if there was any renal tubular damage. And he says, so there you go. Let me go down here. They say on the toxicology analysis of the antemortem samples dated 30th of June and the postmortem samples collected on the 4th of August showed no detection of alpha ammonidin or beta ammonidin in the blood, urine, hair, or liver. And they ask him if that is correct. He says that is correct. And they said the toxicology report was available to Dr. Duffy when he wrote the autopsy report. The toxicology report was available to Dr. Duffy at the time he wrote the autopsy. And he says, yes, that's correct. They said while alpha ammonidin and beta ammonidin were not detected in the toxicology specimens, either in antemortem or postmortem, they said, what did you conclude the autopsy findings are consistent with? And he says the pattern of injury is very consistent with ammonidin poisoning. And he says, so they ask him to explain a little further about why this is consistent with ammonidin poisoning. Here, let me put up this, by the way, so people know that they can try and talk to me, but I can't see what they're saying. There you go. And they say here, so by eating the toxin, there is damage to the bowel mucosa, which was responsible for the vomiting and diarrhea. Then, as that toxin is brought through or absorbed through the portal circulation to the liver, it is then taken up to the liver, and there is a relatively preferential uptake into the liver by a specific protein mechanism, a transporter mechanism. And then that enters into the liver cells, and effectively, it basically stops protein production. It just stops it completely, and the cell dies. He says it takes some time for that to occur over a period of time. So the liver failure particularly becomes very evident from about day 2 onwards. He says it is occurring, but they become very sick from about day 2 onwards. He says, in addition, I mentioned about the renal tubular changes, which he says I'm not certain that we can see, but that is also something that is a possibility. So the whole pattern is very consistent with this type of poisoning. He says, having said that, because we cannot say that there is amatoxin in the specimens from the deceased, he says cannot attribute directly to that, so it has been left open, but only to say that the pattern is very similar to something they've seen in Amanita poisoning before. And they say, yeah, can you sort that out? All right. So they say here, they mention about the renal tubular changes, which I'm not certain they can see. We went through that. And then he says, so it's a reasonable supposition to make that this is what occurred, but we cannot prove it. So they say, is it compatible with a clinical impression of amatoxin toxicity? And he says, yes. And they said, thought to be due to the consumption of death cap mushrooms. And he says, yes. They ask, there was no evidence of any injuries which may have caused or contributed to the death. And he says, correct. They said, did Heather Wilkinson suffer from any serious pre-existing health condition that you have been able to discern from her medical records or from reading Dr. Duffy's autopsy report? And he says, no, she seemed to have been a fairly healthy elderly lady. And they go into another autopsy sort of questionnaire down here, and they start talking about other people. So there's three three people who died. So it's Don, Gail, and Heather. We just heard about Heather, and they talk about a little bit about Gail here. And they just asked, did you perform this autopsy on her on the 5th of August at 10:48 a.m. in the morning at the Institute? And he says, I did. And they said, it was indicated to you that she was 70 years old. And he says, yes. And they just go through the same pre report that they weighed her. She weighed 73 kilos and was 162 centimeters tall with a BMI of 27.8. And yeah, they say here the cause of death was acute liver failure associated with body organ failure. And they said the main autopsy findings were extensive liver necrosis. And they say necrosis being cell death. And he says yes. And they say, and extensive small and large bowel mucosal toxicity or necrosis. And he says, correct. They say no injuries found at autopsy that might have caused or contributed to the death. And he says that is correct. And they say, like Heather Wilkinson, there was no alpha ammonidin or beta ammonidin detected in any of the toxicology specimens for this particular person. And he says that is correct. But they say, but it is your evidence that the pattern is like Heather, consistent with this person having been poisoned by death cap mushroom. And he says, correct. They say, with that cause of death being acute liver failure and multi organ failure. And he says, that is correct. They said, did Gail suffer from any serious pre existing health conditions that you have been able to gather from reading her medical records or performing the autopsy on her body? He says, I'll just qualify this to say there was no serious issues just prior to her death. And what they mean by that is she had an illness a few years ago, but they're saying it didn't have any relation to how she died. And that when she died, there was no impact of this particular illness within her death. So that I'm not going to go into what that medical record is, but because I know the family was really hypersensitive about just not detailing everything, especially some of this stuff. I mean, you can imagine like if that was your family, your grandma or something. I'll just say that yeah, in 2022 she had an illness which she recovered from. She went to hospital. They gave her medication. She recovered from it. There was no need, no way that she could have it impact her in her death. So that's what the pathologist is saying. While that did happen, she'd already recovered from it. So there you go. Your grandkids think you're ancient. Peanut Chocolate says, "Oh my word, I'm almost a senior, but I feel elderly." You're all making me feel very young tonight, even though I feel very old most of the time myself. Even though everyone's like, "Oh my god, you're just a baby." I don't feel like that at 40. I'm telling you, I don't feel as young as I used to be. I still feel a little still feel somewhat getting older. So yes, I'm gonna move past that. And people can bitch at me for whatever, but it doesn't add anything to the story of what or the evidence really. They're just trying to qualify it by saying there's nothing that added to her death. That's it. That's all they're looking for here. So I don't think by revealing what this is, it really gives you any insight to anything. So we'll move on. And they say here, finally, I want to ask you about Donald Patterson. Did you perform the autopsy on the bottle? On the bottle? No. On the body of Donald Patterson on the 8th of August, 2023 at the Institute? And they say that is correct. And they go through that same thing here. And they said, when you said the histopathology report, when you said that the histopathology report from the Austin hospital in relation to liver, was that in relation to the liver transplant? And he says that is correct. And so we know that they tried to do a liver transplant on Don, and it was not successful. They said that he went downhill pretty quick even after they tried to do that and tried to save his life, and it didn't work. So they ask here, what is the primary cause of death? Is it similar to the other two, where it was liver necrosis and associated multi organ failure? And they say here, yeah, so they're asking about the cause of death. And he says, all right, so in essence, as with the other two have primary liver necrosis and associated multi organ failure, he also had a failed transplanted liver. And he says, I have in this case, because the toxicology from the antemortem urine did show the presence of Amanita phalloides toxin. And he says what that is primary 1B to the cause of death. And they said, so primary liver necrosis secondary to Amanita phalloides toxicity. And he says, yes. And they said, transplant liver failure as a result of that poisoning in effect. He says, no, not really. He says sometimes the reasons the liver is not surviving, and then you get a rejection. And he says, then you get a hypodynamic issue that causes them not to survive. And he says, a cause of death, they ask him, cause of death included multi-organ failure. And he says, yes. And he says, they also say that he had cardiac hypertrophy, hypertrophy. And they say basically what that is when they do the autopsy on you, they look at the size of your heart. And he says that he had a slightly enlarged heart, but they didn't believe that was attributed to anything surrounding his death either. So, and they said, so he says basically one of the issues that we look at is the size of the heart, and that comes down to the weight. And they ask him to explain that, and he says, so Donald's heart weight was 563 grams. One of the ways we work out whether it is normal or not is that there are many charts that have been done that documented the weight of the hearts in a whole range of people. And he says for that, his particular weight and his height, they give a range, and that's the 5th to the 95th percentile. And he says that's the one we're particularly interested in is the 95 percentile because that sort of defines the cutoff of normal. He said in this case for his height and weight, it was 541 grams. So he was about 20 grams over what we consider to be borderline normal. He said the heart appeared slightly dilated and enlarged. And the other issue we could take into account with regard to the heart is the thickness of the ventricular wall. So left ventricular wall was 15 millimeters or 1.5 centimeters. And for the right, that was 4 millimeters or 0.4 centimeters. He says that's borderline for changes to hypertensive heart disease. And what they're talking about is hypertension. So they're saying that Donald most likely suffered from hypertension or high blood pressure. And they're saying here, he says here though, and he makes this remark in court today. He said, "So the changes that I witnessed are compatible with a mild degree of hypertensive heart disease. As such, there are many, many people who are walking around at the moment, and perhaps a good number in this courtroom, who have hypertensive heart disease and they are alive and going." He said, "In this case here, given the very marked changes that we've seen in the liver and bowel, I considered that the small degree of his enlargement of his heart was not contributory to his death." So he's saying basically the enlarged heart was not something they were worried about with the severity of the other issues. Maybe if he died and he had the enlarged heart, they'd be like, "Whoa, hey, that's odd." But the other issues are so severe and so catastrophic that this is just not even on their radar. It's like, no, that's not what we're looking for. Like, this dude had no liver. Like he had a liver transplant. It failed. The body ended up having some sort of rejection of it, and then he had, you know, amatoxin symptoms and things like that. It's not what the main cause of death here was. Like, he probably had high blood pressure and hypertension or something, but not what killed him. Like he says, there are many people walking around today who have hypertension or high blood pressure, and they are alive and well. Doesn't mean might not kill you, but there's ways of treating it. There's ways of managing it. It's not a death sentence as such. I'd say that within the pathology and the autopsy, a histology of scripts that he may have put in over the last X amount of time would have been a consideration in that autopsy. So those medical records probably would have been reviewed, and they're saying that they don't see anything here that contributed to his death. Okay. So that was I think that's all of it, right? Just let me double check my notes here. So he was cross-examined after that by Colin Mandy. So Colin Mandy is Erin Patterson's representation. That is her like head legal. He has run most of the defense for most of the trial. We have other people. So there's Miss Stafford and there's Miss Warren and there's Miss Lenthal. They're sort of like secondary to uh, Colin Mandy and Dr. Rogers. So those two are the heads of each side of the bar. And then you have on Colin Mandy's side, you have Miss Stafford, and she often runs things when Colin Mandy needs to do something else or whatever. And then on the other side, you have Miss Lenthal and Miss Warren, and they help Dr. Rogers when she either can't be there or has to do some other legal stuff. I don't know what she does, but sometimes she can't be there, or she's visiting with a witness, or she's organizing papers or legal things. So sometimes you'll hear from these other people, but for the majority part of Erin's side, you'll hear mostly from Colin Mandy. So Colin Mandy does most of the cross exam and things like that. And so he does his cross exam of Dr. Beer, which I think is a great name, by the way, Dr. Beer. And they ask him here, Colin asks Colin Mandy SC, have you been asked to provide an expert opinion in this case to the cause of death of these three individuals? He says yes. And then they say, that's your experience as a pathologist, that is the cause of death. And he says yes. And they say, in your medical practice, you don't see many living patients. And he says no, because they deal with autopsies and mostly dead people. So, and it says here, Colin asks him, so in the context, your opinion is that the cause of death in these three individuals is consistent with amatoxor poisoning. And he says, correct, yes. And Colin follows that up with, as to whether or not there were any pre-existing medical issues which might have contributed to the progress of the illness, your evidence is that there were none apparent in the autopsy. And he says, that is correct, yes. Then he says, that there were none apparent in the clinical records that you were provided. And he says, correct. And then he says, so Colin goes on to ask this question about um, like contributing factors. That's sort of what they're talking about. And he says, which doesn't exclude that there could have been other contributors to the progress of the illness. And then the doctor asks, like, what illness are you talking about? And he says, the progress of the amatoxor poisoning illness. And the doctor says, clearly, if someone has significant comorbidities, I can't even pronounce it. It's too late at night. I can't do it. I've had too many words in my head all day, especially medical terminology. Here, this is the word. I ain't pronouncing it. What that word is. And he says they're not going to deal with the amatoxin poisoning as well as someone who is very healthy individual. And he says, yes. And they ask him, so there weren't any of these or other serious medical issues apparent on the face of what you could observe? And the doctor replies, yes. So he couldn't find anything. They ask here about, so Colin Mandy in his cross exam asks, when Donald Patterson arrived to your facility, he said he weighed somewhere between 127 or 129 kilos. And Colin proceeds to ask about the ambulance personnel who originally dealt with Donald weighed him at around 80 kilos when he was transported earlier on in the illness. And he's sort of asked to explain that. And the doctor says that this basically comes down to fluid overload, that Donald was probably suffering from way too much fluid in his body. And it could have been from a range of different things. It could have been from IV treatments, being pumped full of like different medications, and possibly the illness itself was not allowing flushing of water from the system. So when he went to the morgue and had his autopsy, he may have been heavier than in his everyday life because, well, they were pumping them full of like fluids and IV and vitamin C and all these different treatments to try and save his life. Comorbidity. There we go. Thank you. When you separated it, now I can do it. Other medical conditions. Okay, thank you. You just can't look at mushroom soup anymore? I don't think I've ever had mushroom soup. How many stone? I have no idea. We talking kilos here, buddy. We talking grams and kilos in this country. All right, cowboy. In this country, we work on kilograms. We use the real measurements of the world. You go back to your pounds and fluid ounces, all right? And they say here, yeah, so he basically says there's evidence before the jury that amongst the treatments is a large amount of IV infusion of NAC. I think they tried vitamin C, a bunch of these different treatments. So he's saying there's primarily that the fluid would make the main difference in the weight discrepancy. So that was basically the cross exam of Colin Mandy on the doctor. Geez, did that really take us 45 minutes? Oh my god. We're going to be here all night. No, it must take us half an hour. Oh, that's not bad. That's all right. Kat Irvin says 100 kilos is 15 and a half stone. Why would you weigh anyone in stones? I don't get it. Do they just have like a bucket and they're like, okay, 1 stone, random. They're all kind of general sized and they're like 2 stone. Strange. I think kilos are better. It's a round number. We can deal with it. My brain can deal with it. It's like 1,000 grams equals 1 kilo. And then that's how many grams you have of cocaine to sell. Like, it's how it works. All right. Let's see. Let's see what else I have here. Oh, okay. Okay. So, one of the other witnesses we heard today was a forensic officer, and he is employed at VicPol. So, well, yes, he's employed at VicPol, but he's employed at. Now, let me read this out. This is the entire title. The Forensic Service Department at the Victorian Police Forensic Service Centre. I feel like they need a shorter name for that. They could just call it the Victorian Police Forensic Service Department Centre and cut out like 4 words. But that's where he works, apparently. The Forensic Service Department at the Victorian Police Forensic Service Centre. They need to employ someone that makes like titles and names. And it says here, are you attached to the biological forensic group? And he says, yes, within the biological sciences group. They have a lot of groups and titles, apparently. So this is Ben Goodwin, forensic officer at the place with many titles. And it says here he has a degree in biological sciences with honors in genetics. And it says he's been practicing this since 2008. And they're talking here. So, what a lot of his evidence today was, it was a lot of his work on this sunbeam dehydrator. And they talk about it here. They say, in relation to the case on the 10th of August, 2023, did you examine what was designated item 2 of case number redacted, which was a sunbeam dehydrator? And he says, yes. And they said that dehydrator was black in color. And he says, yes. And they say, did it have a control panel on the top? And he says, yes. And it had 6 trays inside. He said, yes. And we'll go down here. So what we saw like a chart and photos to do with the examination of the dehydrator. So they were showing us photos, well, of the trays, of the outside of the dehydrator, and they were showing us where they picked up these biological, sure, organic fragments and pieces, and what they were looking for testing from this dehydrator, which we'll go into in a minute. And so that was shown to us, and they say that they'll go through the chart. It has 7 areas relating to the dehydrator where you collected possible vegetable matter. And he says that is correct. And he says here, oh, I don't want to go through all this. I don't think you guys want me to go through all this. It's basically talking about how he labeled the different samples. I don't know if you want me to go through this for like an hour. I'll just tell you that a lot of it was basically setting up like how he does his work, and when they find something, how do they label that? Take photos. They put the ruler that shows you how big it is. A lot of the early evidence was that, really. And they say here, Okay. So apparently, a fingerprint expert called Sonia Jeremia, and he says that there was a lot of powder that you can see in the photo of the dehydrator. And they were asking, like, what is that? And he says it was a fingerprint expert that was trying to find fingerprints on it. And when he got it, it had that on it. So, and he said then they asked him, so she conducted her examination of the dehydrator before it was then handed to you for your examination. And he says, well, we conducted it at the same time together. So they sort of work together. And they say, once you concluded your examination, the 7 samples that you collected, what did you do with those? He says, at the conclusion of the examination of the dehydrator and the trays and everything else, he says, the samples of possible wait, I can't pronounce anything tonight. Vegetable debris were placed into packaging, and that was labeled 7 specimen jars containing what appears to be vegetable matter slash debris from item two being the dehydrator. And then they said, then that was sealed, and a new electronic record or new exhibit was created, and that became item three. And then the item was temporarily stored within the evidence recovery laboratory prior to being returned to the forensic exhibit management unit, and that was on the 11th of August 2023. So that was all of his evidence really. It was just showing how he did find this vegetable matter within the dehydrator, and they just basically uh, bagged and tagged it. Really, took the evidence photos of it and stored it away after he did his work. That was it. But we did get to see a few photos of him doing that work, and we got to see the dehydrator, the trays pulled out, a couple of areas where they had actually found vegetative matter or vegetable matter, bits of possible mushroom is what was later found out. So we know that some of these samples did testing positive to Amanita phalloides later on. So that was his evidence. He didn't go for very long. He was a very short witness today, very short. But I think the thing that you guys might be interested in was more the photos, and that unfortunately we don't get them, so I have to sort of describe them to you. But if you've ever seen a forensic breakdown of any item, where they have the ruler and they sort of like pinpoint it, and it's here, and they take a photo, and then they put it in the specimen jar, and then they label that, and it's got numbers on it, and that type of thing. That's basically what the photos that we saw today of the dehydrator are. Yeah, that's what it is. But well, it's a dehydrator, not a freezer. So it'd be dehydrated, I guess, not really frozen, but no, that's not his job. I would say that his job was just to collect the samples and sort of do the analysis of the dehydrator. So his entire job is to, like, they go, "Hey, look at the dehydrator. What can you find?" And he goes, "Well, I found this, and I put it in a test tube," and then they send it away for analysis. And that's where the other evidence from the other people. Um, so a couple of weeks ago, we heard from a guy who does DNA barcoding and stuff like that, that sort of thing. This guy's job is just to sort of find the biological matter. That's sort of what he told us in his evidence. So I wanted to kind of summarize that because a lot of it was like, here, I'll give you an example. Yeah. I'll go right up to when they start talking about it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So they said, so maybe perhaps if you can put a cursor on that, and they're asking to show this specific area called designated C area. And he says, are you, they say, scroll through the document, and then he's like, is this what you're looking for? And she's like, "Yeah, yeah, that." And he's like, "Yeah, that's designated C area." And then they say, "Did you put that into a specimen jar?" He says, "Yes, correct, I did." And he said, and then they ask him, "That became sample C, is that right?" And he says, "That is correct." And they said, "Now this is the fourth item that was on your list that we started with, which is tray 5 insert." So in the dehydrator, there was different trays, 1 to 5, and they ask him some questions about it. And this is one of them. They say, "So now the fourth item that was on your list that we started with, which is tray 5 insert." So inside tray 5, there was actually, I think he was trying to explain that there was an insert that sat within the tray, and he pulled that out too, and that became an item. And they say, "Are you able to explain what insert or tray insert is?" And he says, "Yep. So when we were looking at the dehydrator, there was a tray, and then this was sitting inside the tray itself. So it was like an insert." And they say, "So you have said there were 6 trays in the dehydrator total." And they said, Did each tray have an insert?" And he says, "I don't recall." And they said, "All right, you have indicated that this insert was on tray 5." And they asked him, "How did you number the trays?" And they said, "Did you go top to bottom or bottom to top?" And he says, "Top to bottom." So he numbered them like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he went top to bottom. And then they say, as we look at this image, so we're seeing an image on the screen at the time, and they say, "There are 2 small purple squares at the top left-hand side of the image." He says, "Yes." And they say, "Did this indicate areas where you located and collected what appeared to be vegetable matter?" And he says, "Correct." And they said, "As with the other items, did you collect and place those pieces of vegetable matter in a specimen jar?" And he says, "Yes." And it says, "Was that designated D?" And he says, "Correct." So this is sort of how it went on. They just explain how these samples in the evidence came to be. We hear about these A, B, C, D, E, F samples that had vegetable matter or debris. Well, this is the guy who originally bottled those up and labeled them and got them into testing. So that's what his evidence was really about, really. Yes, we already know all that. That's okay. We already know all that. I think we've gone through that evidence a couple of weeks ago. That's okay. We already know that one. Guys, some of your questions I cannot bring up on the screen. Yeah, I can't. Some of the things you are talking about, I cannot bring up. All right. So that's it. That's it from Mr. Goodwin. I think that's good enough for his. If and ever should I ever be able to get my hands on some of these exhibits, I will then go back through this and show it to you and explain a bit more. But it's very hard when I don't have the photos to show you, because it's just like me playing Mr. Squiggle here, going, "Look, there was a page and there was a photo, and then there was like a red square, and inside the red square was some sort of vegetable matter." And I feel like I'm on an ABC children's show, like pantomiming on the live stream here. And that's not really, well, it's not fun. Well, it might be fun for you. It's not fun for me, and not good information either. But you sort of get the gist of what he was talking about. It's just basically how he bagged and tagged, um, yeah, that vegetable debris. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay. So the one I want to talk about here is Sally Ann Atkinson. And this was the one that we sort of finished the day with today. And I was sitting there going, "Oh, so it's after lunch. It's gonna be a long afternoon." And then they were like, "Okay, let's talk about all this." And I was like, "Oh, I should pay attention again." So now I'm going to go over it with you. And it says here, can you state your full name for the court? She says, it is Sally Ann Atkinson. And they say, what is your occupation? She says, I'm a senior public health advisor in the Department of Health. They really love their labels that have two of the same word in it, don't they? And then she says, as of at July 2023, what role did you occupy? By the way, this is Miss Warren for the prosecution asking these questions now. And she says, I was a manager of the enterics team within the communicable diseases prevention and control team. And they ask, how long had you been in that role? She said about 14 months at the time at July 2023. And they said, what is enteric? And she says, enteric means like gastro. So anything to do with vomiting, diarrhea, gastro type illnesses, things like salmonella, typhoid, hep A, anything that causes a gastro illness. And they ask her, so that was dealt with by your team at the time? And she said, that was my team, yes. And they ask her, what did your role entail? And she says, as the manager, I supervised a team of people. I think it was about 6 people at the time. So I could allocate work to them. And she says, as notifications of illnesses came in, we would investigate those and I would make sure they were allocated across the team. As outbreaks of potential other viral or bacterial outbreaks came in, I would notify and then I would allocate those to different team members to make sure the jobs across the team were equitable, and I would be making sure that the job was done. She says, basically, and at times I may take on the job as well. And they ask her why, or they often use yes. And what they mean by that is sort of like go on. And she says, because we are a small team and lots of work came into us. So because there are only about 6 people, she would often step in and do the work because, well, there was no one else. So when they got flooded with work, she just, you know, she did what a good boss does, and she does the same work that she delegates to other people. That is a sign of a good leader, is when you delegate and then you're willing to do the same things that you delegate to other people. A bad leader is when you delegate and refuse to do the work that you ask other people to do. So, yeah. And they say here, when did a notification make its way to you or your team? And they said, why would it, like, how does that happen? Like, how does this process start? That's what they're sort of asking. How do you get notified that there's an issue? And she says, a doctor or a lab may notify of an illness if it's something that could be notified by. For example, if it was a possible foodborne outbreak, it could be council notifying or a person from the public notifying. There's a variety of different ways we may receive a notification, but it could be through a lab or a doctor notifying a particular specific illness. And they ask, what do you consider an outbreak? And she says 2 or more people is an outbreak in our definition. And yeah, I'll move a little further down here. So she says they often liaise with other people like the city council or the regulatory authority for food premises. She says you may need to liaise, for example, if you need a Hep A, and she goes, there's other people you have to talk to and work with. It's sort of like a coordination of various departments. And then they ask her, so on the 31st of July at 2:33 p.m., did you receive a notification about a possible disease notification? And she says yes. And they ask, what was the subcategory of that notification? And she says amatoxin. And they ask her, what is that? And she says death cap poisoning or alleged death cap poisoning. And they said, where did that notification come from and from whom? And she says it was through an email through TMC, which is a telephone notification system. and it came from a doctor who called in to notify, and then that came to us as an email, and it came to our main email box. And they asked, "What is this telephone notification system?" And she says, "So we have a 1-300 number that people call up and they can select different options. One of them is to notify an illness, and then they follow follow the prompts and number pressing, and it sort of gets the message to them." And they ask her where the doctor that contacted you in regards to the amatoxin report. They ask, where did that come from? Which hospital? And they said, she replies, the Austin Hospital. And they said, "Do you remember which doctor it was?" And she says, "Dr. McDermott, Connor McDermott." And they said, "Yes, it came in via email." Um, and they said the original information that came in was that it might be 6 people who had eaten a meal together. And then she says that the doctor actually clarified later on that it was only 5 people. But he did say that there might be 2 children who had attended the event, but he didn't know if they had consumed the meal or not. So he advised that the illness onset for these people was somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m. And they said on the evening following the lunch, so the lunch was on the Saturday night to Sunday morning, so approximately 12 hours later, thereabouts, for the onset. And they ask her, did he say in relation to their presentation what their symptoms were? And she replies, the doctor said their symptoms were severe diarrhea, vomiting, nausea, and abdominal pain. And apparently he said at the time the diagnosis was unclear, but they had suspected amatoxa poisoning. So, all right. So they ask here, did the doctor have any information about where the mushrooms might have come from? And she replies, he did. He explained that he believed the mushrooms had been part of the mushrooms that had been purchased from an Asian grocery store in April 2023, and that they were dried Asian mushrooms. And he thought at the time that they had been frozen. And they say here that they'd been purchased in April, then stored frozen up until the time of using in July 2023. And they asked, did he relay any information to you about where the Asian grocery store was located? And she says, he said it was either in Oakley or Mount Waverly. They ask her, did he also tell you that the mushrooms had been purchased from a local Woolworths as well? And she says, yes. He said it was 2 components, and that part of the mushrooms were normal butter mushrooms from Woolworths, and the other one, the second part, they were dry mushrooms or dried mushrooms. They said, did he provide you with information at the time of his phone call about the status of the cases or the people who presented with the illness? And she says, yes, he did. Yeah. I want to move further down. All right. So they said after they started their after they started their investigation, one of the first people that she tried to make contact with was Simon Patterson. So we know who that is. And they ask her, when was that contact made? And she says, that was around the afternoon after I spoke with my manager. She says it was very late in the afternoon on the 31st of July. And they asked, was that by phone? And she says, that was by phone. He actually initially was not happy to speak to me, which happens sometimes where people are not sure who I'm calling from. And she says, so I sent him an email through our main inbox, which has a proper Department of Health signature block to it. And then he confirmed that he was happy to speak to me. So when she first called, he didn't know who was calling. And he was like, "Hey, who is this person?" And just was like hung up. And then she sent out an email from their official email account. And then he's like, "Oh, yeah, these people? Sure, I'll talk to you." So I think he maybe thought it was random person or something. And he's like, "I don't want to talk to a random person." And it says here, did Mr. Patterson confirm that neither of the children were experiencing any symptoms, but they were also at a hospital by that stage having blood tests? And he says he did confirm that. And they say, did he say that he did not know if there were any leftovers of the food in the home and he did not have a key to get in? And she says, correct. He said he had no access to the home. And then they said, did you ask him whether or not Erin, and they say by that stage you knew the person who had prepared the meal was a person by the name of Erin Patterson? And she says yes. And then they said, did you ask Mr. Patterson whether Miss Patterson could have picked the mushrooms herself? And the she replies, Sally Ann Atkinson replies, I did ask him that. And they say in response to that, he said that that was not something that Erin was ever known to do, and she says that is correct. They said, "Did you also ask him how often this group would eat a meal together?" And Sally says, "I did." And they said, uh, "Did he say that they had not eaten a meal together recently, if at all?" And she says that is also correct. They asked Sally, "Did he also say the last time would have been years ago at a family function?" And she says that is correct. They say, after you had this conversation with Simon Patterson, going into Tuesday, the 1st of August 2023, did you then make contact with Erin Patterson? And she says, I did. And they said, was that via the number that was provided to you from Dr. McDermott? And she says, it was. And they saying here, at what time did you speak to Erin? And she says 8:33. And they said, at this stage, where was Erin? And the doctor, Sally Ann Atkinson replies, she was still in the hospital. And they asked, did she say how she was feeling at this time? And Sally says she was feeling okay. They say, did you ask Erin about her symptoms? And Sally says, I did. She told me that her symptoms that she was experiencing, she had experienced some diarrhea, that she started to feel a bit unwell slightly before midnight on the 29th and 30th. And then about midnight, she said that she started to experience explosive diarrhea, which she said went pretty much throughout the evening, throughout that night, every 15 to 20 minutes, and then throughout the rest of Sunday. She said it was more approximately every 45 minutes. She then said towards the end of Sunday afternoon, evening, she started to feel better. So she had a little bit of something to eat, a bowl of cereal, and then she said she started to feel worse again. They said, when did she say she started to feel worse again? They said, after the bowl of cereal in the evening. She didn't give me a specific time. And she says it was a Sunday evening. And they said, what did she tell you about what she did on the morning on the Monday, 31st of July? Sally says she said that she got her kids ready for school, and that she wasn't feeling very well. So she got her kids ready for school, got them on the bus, and then took herself to the hospital. And they say then she was ultimately transferred to Monash Hospital from there. And Sally says that is correct. They said, did you ask her to provide any details about the meal she served on the 29th? And Sally says, I did. She confirmed that it was a beef Wellington, that she'd also served mashed potato and beans, and that she'd also had a packet of gravy. That was one of those reheatable packets, so she didn't make it herself. She explained that it was a meal she'd never made before, and that she wanted to do something fancy. She explained that the majority of the ingredients she had were purchased from Leongatha Woolworths. And they say, but, well, Sally says, but she also added in some Asian dried mushrooms from a store that she purchased back in April. They said here, did she also say that her mother-in-law had brought a cake for the lunch? And she said yes, and that her aunt had also brought a fruit platter, and that was a yes as well. So, yeah, they say in relations to the mushrooms that she said she purchased from an Asian store, did she give you any information about the location, the store, anything like that? Sally says she said she wasn't sure she had purchased where she had purchased them, but she thought it could have either been Clayton, Oakley, or Mount Waverly. She said she'd driven around a lot that day that she purchased them, so she wasn't exactly sure where she'd been. And they asked Sally, like, what did you do to try and get her to remember, or like to find find details or some sort of way of tracking it? And they say here, let me go here. So they apparently she they Sally asked her, did you take the kids to a drive-in or takeaway food or something like that, like so they could track where she'd been, what suburb? But Erin had told them, no, I didn't take the children for any like McDonald's or something like that. And so that was a strikeout for her. And they say here, did you ask her questions about the packaging of mushrooms? And Sally says, I did. And she said she didn't have the packaging anymore. She said it was a small see through bag with a white label on it, but didn't have a lot of writing on it. It didn't look very professional, she said. It was not a resealable bag, and that she had discarded it, but it was a small see through bag with a white label. So what Sally did to try and narrow this down, she actually got a pen like this, something similar, and got a snap-lock bag of various sizes and put the pen next to the bag and was trying to like get Erin to tell her like which bag is the correct one. And this is what they talk about later on in the text messages about these snap-lock bags. They're trying to figure out like how big is it, like in relation to a pen. So Sally had sent these photos through of snap-lock bag with a label, little label on it, and then the pen next to it, just asking her like, is it this big? Is it half of this big? Does it look like that? And that was some of their conversation that you'll hear a little bit later on. So here they ask her, did Erin say when she had opened or first opened the mushrooms? And Sally says at the time when she purchased it originally, that's when she opened it. She said she had purchased it originally for a specific meal she was making, which I think was a pasta dish or something. But that when she opened it, she thought they smelt funny. So she then decided that she probably wouldn't use them all. So she put them in a container to put the rest, for later on. They said, you just said she wouldn't use them all. Did she say that she used any at a point in time? And Sally says the way she explained it, it indicated she could have used some. And then she says, in the original dish. So, and they say here, when you asked Erin about how she prepared the mushrooms, how did she do them? And she says here, Erin explained that for the recipe, it required 1 kilo of mushrooms and she'd purchased buttered mushrooms from Woolworths, and that the way she explained it was she needed a kilo of mushrooms, so she thought she'd just add the rest of these mushrooms into the mushroom mix. And by the rest of the mushrooms, she means the dried mushrooms, and then add them into the butter mushroom mixture. And they say, did she say how she prepared the mushrooms that she bought from Woolworths and how she prepared those for the meal? And Sally Ann says she did. She explained that she had for the dried mushrooms, she had rehydrated them, then chopped them up and added them to the chopped up mushrooms from Woolworths. Yeah, I'll go further down here. We'll go into the text messages if I can find them. So late in the day, we heard about these text messages that were between Sally Ann and Erin. And here, so they asked Sally Ann, "Can you please read out what you wrote in the message to Erin?" And I remember seeing these on the screen, and I had to rush up to the screen because it was so tiny, and I was like this, like what is going on? Because the message was quite long. So yeah, so I had to like get really close to our screen to be able to like be like write all this down because it was ridiculous how long it was. So here we go, and it says here, "Hi, Erin. Sally from the Department of Health here. I spoke with you this morning. I have left a message for you to call me, but thought it might be helpful if I let you know the sort of information I wanted to discuss. I need to know what drinks were served at the lunch. I also need to know what types of shallots you purchased. And if you could please give me a basic description of the packaging of mushrooms from the Asian grocer, that would be good. Approximate weight and size of the packaging. Was it partially see through or not? If you can think of any of the name of the road you were on." And then she says, if you can think of any of the names of the road you were parked on, near, or when you went to the different grocery stores, then I can have officers out looking around those areas. Even a landmark you might have remembered at the time would be helpful. Just things to think about when I talk to you again. Thank you, Sally. And they said this happened on the 1st of August in the morning. And they say, um, they then ask her, "Can you read out the response from Erin?" And Erin says, "Hi, Sally. Sure, I will try get that information all to you as soon as possible. I'm just dealing with trying to manage and look after the kids in hospital here and a bit snowed under trying to manage that. I'll get this info to you as soon as I can, but I've just been in a couple of meetings with people at the hospital when you've been trying to call." And then Sally replies, "Thanks so much. I understand. Are your kids doing okay at the moment? I will try calling you later this afternoon around 5." And then Erin replied, "Yeah, they're fine. Thanks. Thank you." And then Sally replied, "Very pleased to hear it." And then it says here, were there any further attempts to contact Erin Patterson by phone, as they previously talked about? And Sally says, "At 5:22 p.m. that day, I tried to call her." And they ask her, "Did she answer that phone call?" And Sally says, "No, she did not." And Sally says, "I left a voicemail for her asking her to call me back." They said, "Did you receive a response that day?" And Sally says, "I did not." Then the following morning, or the following day, Wednesday, the 2nd of August, "Did you attempt to contact Miss Patterson again?" Sally says, "I did at 8:56 a.m." And they said, "Did she answer?" Sally says, "No, I left another voice message asking her to call me back." And they saying, "Did you say anything else in the voice message?" Sally says, I told her I had further questions for her. They said, did you receive any phone call or communications back from Erin? She says, I did not. They said, in response to that phone call, later that morning, did you receive a message? Oh, no, they say, did you send more messages to Erin via text? And she says, I did. And then this is the message here. This was at 9:29 a.m. It says, "Good morning, Erin. I left you a voice message this morning as I really do need to work on getting parts of this investigation underway as soon as possible. I understand you probably have lots going on, so I thought I'd message you my questions so that you can respond with what you do know and work on the rest. Alternatively, I'm also happy to email you if you provide me with your email address, if that is an easier way to type out your responses." And she lists some questions here or ideas. Number one, can you please confirm that it was definitely only the one other time you cooked with the dried mushrooms when you first opened them? No one else reported symptoms or issues when consumed? 2. Please advise what drinks were served at the lunch. 3. Please confirm what kind of shallots were used in the beef Wellington. Were they spring onions or the small individual shallot type onions, please? 4. Did you possibly use your card to purchase the mushrooms? And can you please check your bank statements for the shop? That would be amazingly helpful. 5. Could there possibly be any leftover food still in the fridge? We could get counsel to meet your children on site and collect for testing. 6. Can you look at the maps and think of any streets you parked on or near that would be helpful for looking for the shops in Oakley, Mount Waverley, or Clayton? We are urgently organizing sampling to get started today. 7. Can you recall the size and type of packaging, including color, and what made you pick the brand over any others? Thanks again for your assistance, and please feel free to call me back if you prefer. Um, and they said this was sent at 9:29 a.m. Wednesday, the 2nd of August. And they said, did you receive a response from Erin Patterson to that message? And Sally says, I did not. And they said, what was the she said the next thing that occurred that day is that she received a phone call from Katrina from Child Protective Services, who is Katrina Cripps. They said here. They said, "What time did she say what time she was intending to visit Erin's property?" She said she had an appointment to visit Erin about 1 p.m. as they'd been discharged from hospital. They said, "What, if anything, did you ask her to do when she attended?" Sally Ann says, "I asked her if she could call me back when she was in attendance because I was having difficulty getting a hold and speaking to Erin." They said, "Did that occur?" And she said, "It did." They said, she called me about 1:14. They said, "What did she say she was?" Uh, they said, "Did she say she was with Erin at that stage?" And she says she did. Did she hand the phone over to Erin? And Sally says yes. And they said, "Did you then go through your questions with Erin?" And she says, "I did." They said, Uh, they were in relation to whether or not there were drinks served at the lunch. What was Erin Patterson's response? Erin advised that there was water and tea and coffee, and the milk that she'd used for the tea and coffee was purchased at Lee and Gather Woolworths. And they say, in relation to the question you had asked in the text messages, what, like, can you confirm it was the only one other time that you cooked with the mushrooms? What did Erin say in relation to that? She said the mushrooms had not been used in any other meal. And they ask, why did Erin say that she'd not used them before? And she says, Sally Ann says, she said that they smelt funny when she originally opened them, so she decided not to use them. They felt strong and funny, or smelt strong, and funny, so she thought they might be too overpowering for the meal she'd originally planned for them, so she put them in a Tupperware container and decided not to use them. And that was that pasta type dish that they talk about as the original dish. Yeah, I'm just going to try to get down to some of these other text messages. So after this phone call, uh, Er- Sally sent Erin another message on the 2nd of August. And it says, "Hi, Erin. Sorry, council have just asked what time of day did you buy the ingredients on the Friday before the lunch. Council are looking at when the supermarkets receive deliveries and storage, etc. Time of shopping would help with their investigation. Thank you." And they said, "Was this directed at the mushrooms that she purchased from Woolworths?" And they say, "Yes, that is correct." And they asked, "Did you receive a response to that message?" And Sally says, "I did." And they ask her at what time, and she says 2:44 p.m. So she sent that one at 1:14. She got a response from Erin at 2:44, and it reads as follows: "Hi Sally, I'm not sure exactly what time of day. I went a few times last week, and I know I got some of the ingredients on maybe Wednesday or Thursday. I know I bought some discounted eye fillet steaks one time on one of those 2 days. And then I went back on either Thursday or Friday and bought a couple more, but they weren't discounted, just normal price. And I bought the rest of the ingredients at one of those shopping trips. I often go daily or every second day to pick up a bag or two and get what I need as I go. So it's hard to pinpoint an exact day I bought this or that, but she's just saying basically she knows she bought the rest of the ingredients during one of these shopping trips. So, um, and this is where they're talking about these Ziploc bags with the pen next to it. And Sally Ann says, "Hi Erin, I've taken a couple of photos of a Ziploc type bag with just white labels on them. Can you tell me please if either of those sizes looks about right and whether the label size seems right to you? Thanks so much." One is a sandwich type bag and one is a snack type size bag. And then apparently Erin replied back to her with a red circle over one of the images, circling the smaller snack size bag. And then the text reads, "Like this size bag and shape for the sticker." And they say, "What time was that response received?" And apparently it is 4:19. And then apparently a second text message came at 4:06, 5:06, sorry. And it says, it's from Erin. It says, "Looking at the size and volume of things in the supermarket, I realize there's no way the bag and the mushrooms could have been 100 grams worth. I was thinking about the weight of that amount of fresh mushrooms, I think, but dried weighs a lot less. It was probably more like 20 grams dry in a little snack size bag, but without the resealable top." And Sally Ann replied back at 5:54 p.m. and said, "So helpful. That's so helpful. Thank you. I've had some photos sent to me from council. Hopefully, you may be able to confirm that is basically what the mushrooms look like. There's also one of a store. The bags look a bit bigger than what you're saying, so it might not be the correct store. But even if you can confirm the style of packaging and labeling, that really helps." And the store was in Portman Street in Oakley. And the photos that we saw were of some mushrooms, and then a photo of the actual store. So that was what we saw. And yeah, so they just showed a photograph, and that was from Troy. We heard from him a little while ago. So Troy's from Monash Council, and his entire job was to go out there and search these stores and look for these mushrooms based on the description that Erin was giving. So that was his entire job. So that was Troy that was sending these photos back to Sally Ann to then send to Erin Patterson, and then you'll hear the rest in a minute. So Erin responded to these photos of the like porcini type mushroom photos, or shiitake, and she responded at 6:18 p.m. and she says, "Yes, that store doesn't look familiar, but the style of packaging and label is exactly what I meant. They weren't whole like those shiitake mushrooms in the photo. They were sliced, and yes, the packaging was about half that size." Sally replied to her, "Thank you so much. That is sort of the information I need. Very helpful." And then they ask her, "Did you have a further phone conversation with Erin on Thursday, the 3rd of August?" She says, "I did." And they said, "Prior to that phone call, did you send her a message?" And Sally Ann says, "I did." And they said, "Is that the message we see here at 11:19 a.m.?" And she says, "That's correct." And they ask her to read it out. And she says, "Hi, Erin. Would you mind if I give you a quick call to clarify a couple of things? Can sometimes be easier just to talk it through than text." And Erin replied, "Sure." So, so in this phone call, they ask Sally Ann, like, "What did you talk about?" And they said here that apparently they talked about. So Sally Ann says she explained that the Woolworths mushrooms had been processed in a food processor into smaller pieces, and so chopped quite finely. And then they say, and then the dried ones, she rehydrated them, then sliced them and chopped them by hand. And then she says she explained that the shallots and garlic had been fried together in oil before adding both lots to the mushrooms, where they were cooked down into a paste. Um, they say here, in respect to that paste that she made, did she say anything about how much was used? Sally says she said that she used up all the paste to coat the tenderloin steaks that she had used, and all of it had been used up. And they said, did she describe how she coated them? And Sally says she didn't explain that part. Here, just let me go a bit further down here. Okay, I think that's it. I think that was the majority of it, guys. That was it. So basically, you heard 95% of what we did. I just double check that I'm not missing something. Oh, there's one more here. They say so. They say here that apparently she did end up messaging. She messaged Erin again. So Sally Ann messaged Erin again. Good morning, Erin. I was wondering if you could clarify with me, please, what happened to the leftover food from the lunchtime meal when the five of you ate together. I know the pastry and mushrooms from the leftover you scraped off are in the bin, but not sure if that was the same for the other leftovers. Thanks, Sally. And Miss Warren asks, did she respond to that message? And Sally Ann says she did. And they ask, what time did she respond? And Sally Ann replies, she replied back, I think it was pretty much instantaneous. I think I actually don't have a time for that one, but I think it was very quickly. And they say, what did she reply? And the reply was, yes, it all went in the bin. And Sally said, great, thank you. Thank you for confirming that. I thought that would be the case. And then Sally Ann messages her again, asking, Hi, Erin. Sorry, but I forgot to ask about the pastry you use. Do you know what brand? Is it puff pastry or short crust? And did you have that already in the freezer or open a new package? Just for some completeness of my investigation, thanks so much. And apparently, Erin replied fairly quickly and said, "Hi, Sally. I used a combination. It was all Pampers puff pastry from Woolworths. I had some already in the freezer and used that up. And then I also bought some more from Woolies that week, I believe. It was either just the basic Pampers puff pastry or the Pampers butter puff pastry." She also replied, "Oh, I also use phyllo puff pastry. It comes as a roll in a blue box from the freezer section of Woolies. I bought that new." And Sally replied, "Fantastic, thanks." And she said, "Yes, I know that kind. That's fine. Both are generally well distributed products. I just hadn't confirmed the ingredients compared to the rest. Thanks so much." And that is where our day ended. That is where our day ended in court today. So those are all of those text messages that between Erin and Sally Ann Atkinson, and gave you some of the autopsy details, and we spoke a little tiny bit about the I've lost words now. Biological guy. That's all I'm going to call him because I can't. Forensic biologist. That's it. Sorry, it gets to like 10 o'clock at night and my brain just turns to absolute mush because I've been listening to details like for like 5, 6 hours in court all day and I just can't remember words anymore. But that's it. That was today. So that's your update for day 19. Have we really done 19 days of this? I think we have. Hey, Sean. Thank you very much. I appreciate the. Hey, by the way, buddy, I saw your donation over the weekend, but you weren't in chat for me to say thank you. So you now get a thank you tonight. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it, and for the super chat. Hold on, I just want to double check. By the way, thanks to all the new subscribers, all the new people that are liking and you know following the channel and my Twitter and things like that. We are in court every day. I'm there every single day following the case. I haven't missed a day yet. We've been there since opening statements. Been there every day. So by the way, I wanted to thank Wendy. Wendy sent in a donation a couple of hours after the show last night, after we did the late show on the weekend. And Wendy says, "Great show tonight, Ping. Thank you, Wendy." Wendy, thank you so much for the donation. I appreciate it. That helps towards the cost of doing this. It's not easy to just do one thing for 6 weeks and have to not do like any other shows that we normally do and just focus on this. But it's been really worth it. It's just been a hell of a process to go through. For this is week 5. Today is the start of week 5. So yeah, you're welcome. All right. Woman of Steel says, "Thank you, Ping. You're doing a fine job." Thank you, my friend. Hey, good to see you. Good to see you. Just another human. Hey, good to see you. Thumbs up. I appreciate it. Hey, Sean. Just another human. It's a lot. I tell you, it is a lot. Um, my mind really just turns to absolute spaghetti at the end of the night, and then I have to go to sleep and get up and do it all over again tomorrow morning. So, for day 20 tomorrow, it'll be day 20. We're into the 20s now. How many more are we going to get? I have no idea. I have no idea. They don't tell us anything. They don't tell us nothing. They're just like, show up to court tomorrow at 10:30. That's all the judge ever tells us. They're just like, hey, you, that guy, yeah, and all the other journalists. I'll see you tomorrow at 10:30. And you're like, thanks, Justice Beale. See you later. And that's it. We're out for the day. Oh, you've done enough, my friend. I don't want you to be in any strife or anything. But I appreciate all your support, my friend. It's been very helpful. You haven't slept yet? What time is it over there? It's gotta be like 7 a.m., in America. You're a freaking shallot. I was a minute behind the live. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, you know how we have, like, certain things we're not supposed to talk about? Apparently, that's one of them. So, we were told to not acknowledge it and pretend like it didn't happen. So, that's what I'm gonna do because I'm a good boy, and we're so close to the end, I don't wanna get booted out now. So, I'm just gonna do whatever they tell me for the next how long? We could have another 2 weeks. So, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be a good guy and just hang out. I don't know what was going on there anyway. I came in from lunch. I don't know. I heard a bunch of stuff going on, and I was like, "What happened?" Like, and I was like eating a Big Mac, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on here?" Like, I don't know. I don't. I didn't see a lot of it. I was sort of just. I was getting ready from coming back. Like, so it was just after we came back from lunch. So you want to look it up. I think Channel 7 did something on it or something like that, but, not here. Uh, Shallot? Yeah, I know that's how you guys say it, but it's shallot. That's how we say it here. In the civilized world, that has kilograms and grams instead of fluid ounces and pounds or whatever you guys use. Next, you're gonna tell me that you weigh things by donkeys or bison. And that, like, you're like, "Oh, how much flour did you get today?" And you're like, "I got 36 of a bison." And then that's how you're gonna measure things from now on in bisons. I did. I actually had McDonald's for lunch today. I was really hungry for some reason. I never eat McDonald's. I don't think I've had McDonald's in 15 years or something like that. I don't think I've ever had it in a decade and a half. I just don't eat it. But I was, metric system pronunciations, thank you. Alright. Is that what we call it? Is that what you guys are gonna call it now? Okay. I agree with you. You sacked your own comment. We were going to metric in the early '80s. I did actually hear that America originally was gonna join the rest of the world and move to kilos and grams and kilometers per hour and stuff like that, but I don't know. And then you go to England, and England's like some sort of weird mix of imperial and metric, and they don't know what a kilo is, but they know what a pound is, but they drive in kilometers per hour or something. I don't know. England's got a bit of both. Yeah, I don't eat junk food. Like, about the only junk food I ever eat is like pizza or um like Asian Chinese food or something. But fast food is pretty rare. I just don't eat it. It's not my type of thing. If I did eat fast food, I'd probably put on a lot of weight. I get fat really quick, I promise. And being 40 now, I don't know if I could lose it as quick as I could in my 30s. Peanut Chocolate says, "Is Canada completely metric?" I don't know. I'm not Canadian. I have no idea. Woman of Steel said, "Then I don't know how that disappeared for the US. Chips, mate. I like chips every now and then. Depends what type of chips you guys are talking about. Crisps? We call them chips here. So a French fry is a chip. A potato chip is a chip. So in Australia, they're the same thing. So no, it's a little confusing, but they're exactly the same thing in Australia. You can walk into a like McDonald's, even though they call them French fries, Australians will call it a chip, a hot chip. And then you can go to the supermarket and you can buy chips. So Quirks of being an Aussie. Hot chips or a yeah, that's it. You call them crisps in the US? No, they don't. That's a British thing. British people call them crisps. I've never heard an American call it that, ever. Ever, ever. I've only heard British people say that. Smiths, yeah, they did used to have that in the name, they don't anymore. I've never heard Americans use that terminology, ever. Really? Yeah, you call them chips, right? Yeah, 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 yeah. Potato chips. Yeah, I've never heard an American say crisps, ever. I've heard British people do it all the time. But they also have weird names for other things too, so don't blame them. They call it like, yeah, if you're not English and you don't know what this is, but they call a piece of bread with hot chips inside of it and butter, they call it a chip buddy. So there you go. I don't know why they're in charge of our language, but they seem to be. Potato chips from the bag, French fries cooked up. They're just chips here. You can ask someone, you'd be like, "Do you want a bag of chips?" And we can go get some chips. And they'd be like, "All right." And an Australian will know the difference due to like time of day, language, just general conversation of where we're going. It's not blame the British people, don't blame me. I didn't invent it. Oh yeah, yeah, you guys are funny. All right. All right, I have to go to bed. I haven't even had dinner yet, so I have to go. But hey, I love you all. You're all great people. I will see you tomorrow. How many days left do we have? How long's a piece of string? I have no idea. I get this question like at least 942 times a day. People ask me how long is the trial got left? I don't know. Could end today. Well, it won't end today. We're finished already. Could end Thursday or it could end the 28th week in July. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out. You'll know when the trial is ending when I know. Yes, that makes sense. Yeah. So that's when we'll all know is when Ping finds out, I'll tell you, then we'll all know. But right now I don't know. So there you go. Hey, I love you all. Have a great night. I'm going to get out of here. I need to rest and then get back to court in the morning. Yeah, have a great last day, last few hours of your Memorial Day. Memorial Day long weekend 2025 is coming to a close. I'll see you tomorrow for non-Memorial Day Tuesday. Is it Tuesday or Monday? Monday. Non-Memorial Day Monday. And if you're in Australia, it's just a Tuesday evening in bloody May or something. I'll see you then. More information. Maybe we'll hear more from Sally Ann tomorrow. You'll hear more about these text messages. Maybe. Diddy will be done before you. Could be. Could be. I love you all. Have a great night. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, I really would appreciate it if you did. Put in a lot of work to do this for everyone, and the small thing you could do, which doesn't cost anything, is to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the creators out because it bumps that number up, and the higher that stupid number gets, the more opportunities we get, and that brings you more content. So if you could do that for me, I would appreciate it. My name's Ping. This is my channel, Nights with Ping. Good night, everyone. See you later. Bye.